Welcome to the Reclaim app, where we're creating safe spaces of connection with God, each other, and ourselves. Hello, friends, and welcome to the Reclaim app podcast. We're so grateful that you're with us today. We have a great conversation on a topic that can be hard to talk about. We're going to look at intimacy. What does intimacy mean? How do we learn about intimacy? How does it play out in our everyday lives? We're so glad you're here, and we look forward to diving in now with you. And Liz, it's so good to be with you as well.
Awesome. Carrie, if I'm going to be honest, as I was thinking about this episode, I went through ebbs and flows with it because on the one hand, there's just been so many podcasts and articles and books and sermons on intimacy, hey? Yes. And so when I was preparing, I briefly thought, does anyone really want to hear another episode on this? So I confess my attitude may have been less than stellar at the time of the writing of this content because I was also on day 2 of a migraine battle, and the war going on inside me was slugging it out between the side of me that just wanted to crawl under bed sheets and stay warm and cozy, and the other more pragmatic, compassionate side of me reminding me that, even though that might be true, there might be a lot out there about vulnerability and intimacy. There's only ever going to be one Liz voice and one Carrie voice in this conversation, hey? And so all I mean by this is that no matter how much has been spoken or written or sung even, the lens by which you and I are going to kind of approach these topics, these themes, they're going to be different. Mm-hmm. And I think it's actually one way that you and I have been able to get closer together. The more we have these conversations with each other, the more we grow to understand one another more as well, which is good and helps us build up trust, trust and safety with one another. So I bring that up because more to encourage our listeners that in the middle of your own learning, in the middle of your own growth, whether it's through your favorite authors or podcast speakers or through your family and friends, I just want to encourage you to not grow weary or disinterested in the beauty that is your unique voice and story in this world. And, of course, not in a me, myself, and I sort of way, and we're the only ones that matter. Our voice is the only ones that matter. But in a way that honors that you hold space in this world, and you were created for this point in time. And it's lovely you're here. So it's good to be here too, Carrie. Awesome. Thanks for the hello. This is a different way we're doing this, hey, today. Yeah, I love that we're trying this out. Different ways of connecting, different formats here. I just want to say too, I know in my own life, because of how much I love to learn and listen from others, I can spend almost too much of my time listening to YouTube videos or of pastors and leaders. I really love reading psychology books, theology books, biographies. But without realizing it's even happening, I can begin to notice that I start to feel a bit distant from my own voice. And it shows up sometimes in my irritability, I'll say, or that ever wrestling of restlessness, which is very common in my story. Is reading and learning wrong? No, not at all. Of course not, right? But depending on what's going on in my world, I can unintentionally, and if I'm being more honest, very intentionally, replace quiet and solitude and deep listening and communion with God with the thoughts and opinions of others. So if I were to stop listening or reading to my favorites, would I even be familiar with my own voice? So I don't know if this is going to land for anyone, but it's like when you've been away from home for a while or a place that's been familiar. And then you have this moment where you stop and you think about home, about what was once familiar, and you realize it's been a moment since you last checked in with yourself. You might realize it's been a moment because you're weary and you're tired and you don't even know how you got to that place. And maybe the face looking back at you from the mirror, it's that person doesn't even look familiar to me right now. And it's been a minute or maybe months since you've allowed your soul to catch up with you. It's really what ends up happening, hey? Yeah. So, and it's not even necessarily because bad things have happened, hey? Sometimes it's because of a new life stage or life transition, like a new job or a new city or a new relationship, hey? But over time, and it's often very subtle, I can realize for myself, I've become distant or even disconnected from myself.
Mm.
And then intimacy and connection, they become just some other like catchwords and not my reality. So,
Right.
Carrie, you might connect with this. Like you and I have different stories, of course, to state the obvious, and we lead different lives. But the idea that helping others or starting something new might
Mm.
over time lead us to forget to practice the pause, as some people call it, and connect with ourselves, and even know what's actually really going on inside of us right now. Like, what am I even thinking and feeling about life?
Yeah.
Right. So essentially, we can begin to lose intimacy with our very selves. So I'm curious, like, what do you think about this idea of intimacy with the self? Or like, how might that show up in your life?
Hmm. Yeah, so good. I resonate with so much of what you're saying here, Liz. And especially since it's only been just under a year since we stepped out in faith and started our new online work. I remember a dear friend and I having this conversation shortly after we had just launched. And she said, what you're saying, she said, Carrie, your voice, Reclaim's voice, isn't out there yet. She's also a musician and went a step further and asked me to consider what is Reclaim's song. And this question is now on a sticky note in my office, reminding me to share my voice, to share my song, because it's not out there yet, or just little bits of it are out there right now. And we all have a song and a story that is unique to us, and that is meant to be shared as we are in relationship with others and the world, which makes this important as we talk about intimacy today, because intimacy requires that we bring our own voice, experiences, and who we truly are to another. And then that we receive the other in the same way with their own ways of being and doing things, seeking to find that even in the differences, there can be connection.
Yeah, that's so true. And might I add happy anniversary, 1 year with Reclaim,
Yes,
give or
soon
take?
in
Yeah,
November.
November. So
Yes.
good. Um, and I want to say, just going back to even the self piece, just to tag on to what you just said too, it's part of why it's such good work. I often will call it like sacred work in the context of like individual therapy. Why it's so important to connect with the self, meaning your own story with all its like gifts and limitations and joys and struggles, all of it, hey? Not
Yeah.
just the parts that we want to or the parts that are more comfortable. It's also those parts that can cause some tension within us.
Yeah.
And for me, as a follower of Jesus, the more I connect with God, the more I connect with myself, with my authentic self. And with Jesus, I have like a deeper understanding of what might lead me to withdraw from Him and from other people. What leads me to feel more comfortable to lean into relationship, and what causes me one day to take a risk and leave a job without knowing what my next step will be, and then maybe another time, like be so afraid to enter into a new opportunity. Like, what's going on in my current world that one day I felt courageous, and the next day I might feel more afraid? Hey, so
Yeah.
we never really stop learning and discovering the ways we are becoming. Though you could choose to. I mean, there's always the freedom just to choose that. But I would gently discourage you from going down the path of stagnancy, because I know for myself, I've landed on that path longer than planned sometimes, and it's not a place you want to remain for very long.
Yeah. So true.
You're worth getting to know.
Yes.
Um, but speaking of connection with God, self, and others, I thought it would be helpful just to start with a basic definition of intimacy.
Mhm.
So we can just define it as closeness or familiarity. And while the words closeness and familiarity, they're good like working definitions, it's not easy to get a full understanding of how to create intimacy just by using these words alone. Hey,
Yeah.
so for example, like I may have 5 friends, but the depth of intimacy I have with each one is not like equidistant between me and each friend. The level of intimacy or the closeness and familiarity I have with each one will vary depending on many factors, like from how our emotional bonds formed in our history together, to
Mm.
how each of us navigates life transition, grief, trauma, hopes, dreams, and intrigues, even to the kind of humor you can get away with each one. Like some people thrive on dark humor, and others are all about the dad jokes, right? So and something to even keep in mind too, like how long you've known a person isn't necessarily a factor because I may have met someone 6 months ago. I have like a very deep experience of intimacy with. I feel very safe with them.
Mm.
Whereas I might know someone for 30 years. It doesn't mean we have that depth of connection, hey?
Yeah.
So it's why I can appreciate why those who come from disconnected or what can be called fragmented homes grieve what they haven't known by saying statements like, oh, I don't understand this. We're supposed to be a family. Like, what's wrong with us? It's not supposed to be this way. So it's like there's these universal rules which get broken and affect how we live out in the world. It's why everyone has a different gauge of what intimacy looks and feels like to them. And why this is so important, Carrie, and to our listeners, is that we can approach one another wondering why someone seems to share every inch of their story with everyone around them, seemingly with no boundaries, while someone else may present as more withdrawn or closed off from closeness with others. A friend and I were actually talking about the idea that as people, we can sometimes feel too much or not enough. And something I wanted to say about that, because I think that's really important, is that when it comes to our innate person, like our value,
Hmm.
our we're not too much or not enough. You just are. You're valuable. You're loved. I can say that quite clearly, and I do believe that about humanity. We're all made in the image of God. On the other hand, though, I think I think sometimes our stories can be too much for other people.
Hmm.
And that's actually not a bad thing because the reality is like our stories are not always going to translate well to another person. We've all had different experiences in life. Some people grew up when I would have a harder time like connecting with someone from a war-torn country. Not that I think I couldn't sit with them and hear their story, but it would be hard to connect with being in a place of constant fight or flight, hey? If
Hmm.
that's been so much of your story, to someone who's always had stability and lived in the same neighborhood their whole life, right? So I'm not saying you can't connect with other people's stories. I just think I understand why not everyone equally can do that well.
Yeah,
There's no shame with that, hey? Um,
definitely.
we're not all meant to equally understand and carry one another's stories. That's okay.
Hmm.
So one thing I want to say too is that we can end up being confused too about who we are based on how the people around us perceive us. So I don't know
Hmm.
about you, Carrie, but I've had people explain me to me throughout my life in different ways.
Yeah.
So from statements like when I was a kid, Liz, being shy makes you so unapproachable and people don't know how to talk to you.
Hmm.
To one as an adult pastor, being told, Liz, men aren't going to want to talk to you. Women pastors intimidate men. So
Hmm.
it's like, which is it? Am I the shy one? Are men the shy ones? It can be confusing, hey? So
Very.
one person may tell me I'm very approachable and easy to talk with, while another person may see me as reserved and standoffish, hey?
Hmm.
So, and as a teenager, when I was much more shy and insecure, I remember someone told me that I was like, you're such a rock, Liz, is what they said. And they didn't mean it to be kind. It was very accusing because I didn't know how to like process emotions overtly. And the truth, Carrie, is that I had so much going on underneath the iceberg, so to speak. Hey, like so many emotions, but I didn't know how to express them through words. Even like sometimes I felt too shy to even cry in front of people. So it couldn't be further from the truth. I wasn't unfeeling or a rock. I just didn't feel safe enough at that point in my life to share that. Um, so while I did experience different levels of intimacy with friends and family members growing up, it wasn't really until my 20s and 30s when I went to like those deeper depths of vulnerability by developing friendships with people who welcome my questions, encouraged me to talk about what I may have kept hidden a little bit more as a teenager or a lot more as a teenager. And part of learning how to be more vulnerable with ourselves and others is sometimes simply through trial and error.
Yeah. Oh, I think you bring up such an important piece here. And I think a lot of people are going to resonate with what you're saying.
Mm,
I don't know how well intimacy is role modeled for us or how much we really talk about it and what it means. Being vulnerable with others in healthy ways. Like, what does
mhm.
that look like? Finding
Yeah.
safe people and spaces. I think that can be really hard, no matter what your age. but so vital to this piece of intimacy. It reminds me, so recently, while flipping through channels to find something lighthearted to watch, a little moment of reprieve from the devastating news images recently, I stumbled on the show Everybody Loves Raymond. And the scene was of Raymond and his wife, Deborah, getting ready for bed. And as they were settling in, Raymond says, and I'm paraphrasing a little bit here, that it's Deborah's birthday. And so she should just relax. Don't worry. They're only going to cuddle. No other funny business. To which Deborah laughs and says to Raymond, in all our years together, you've never been able to just cuddle. But they try. And about 30 seconds in, Deborah looks back at Raymond and says, you're not going to make it, are you? And he says, no. And they laugh.
Just being honest.
And so he says no, they laugh, they roll over and sleep on their own sides of the bed. And then the show ends. And it made me smile, but perhaps more importantly, it normalized something for me. This scene felt very familiar. Now, that's not to say my husband can't cuddle or that Raymond was wrong and Deborah was right. It just names a common experience that I don't think we talk about. Each of us come into a relationship with our own understandings, perceptions, and ideas and desires for intimacy. And we also come with the ideas of how that should look like and feel and be, yet we don't usually talk about it. And so we have these moments like Raymond and Deborah, where they're both seeking to be loved and express love to each other, but instead they just turn away. And we're created to be in relationship. We need intimacy for flourishing and well-being. But when it's hard to talk about, how do we get there?
And this is what you're saying too, is what I'm hearing you say is that it can be hard to talk about. Part of what complicates it is the different definitions or meanings we attach to that word. Hey, I mean, right. I said to you in the preparation for this is just by Googling like spiritual practices and intimacy, right. Pretty much everything that showed up had to do with marriage. Okay. Right. Which speaks to something. And even if it's not intimacy equals sex, it's like intimacy is something for romantic relationships or that kind of a committed, intentional partnership. Hey? Right. So, for me, Kara, I wouldn't have known how to define intimacy as a kid, which is probably true for most kids. Hey, it's just something you experience. Hey, it's a felt sense we have. So a child's experience of intimacy starts in like whatever their home or family of origin was. So for a kid, did they feel loved and accepted by their parents and siblings? Did they feel safe? When did they feel unsafe? How did they respond to others when they felt safe or unsafe? Could they be more expressive or imaginative, or were they discouraged from experiencing their thoughts and their emotions and creativity? Hey, did they withdraw and self-soothe? So when an adult hurt them, and by an adult hurting them, I don't mean that in an abusive sense. We hurt each other sometimes. Hey, but when a trusted adult hurt them, and the child did feel unsafe, did the child experience that renewed safety after the adult apologized and took ownership of their mistake? So that's good old reparative work, hey? These are examples of how we as kids begin to form like emotional bonds with our parents or our caregivers. It's in our childhood years we first come to experience what emotional connection and closeness or emotional disconnection feels like. So in other words, it's where we first learn about intimate connections. These experiences shape our sense of safety and our sense of self. Am I loved? Am I loved for who I am? Or am I only loved for like what I do, like my performances, for not embarrassing my parents? Or am I only loved if I remain hidden from sight? And I don't know if this connects with some of our listeners, but the idea that children should be seen and not heard is one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. And I am sorry to those, like we can make it as a joke, but if that's something you were honestly taught, that you should be hidden away from sight, that's better I am so sorry, because that is not the way you're to treat kids.
Oh, I am so grateful in 2023, prayerful and grateful that we are moving away from that.
Yeah,
Our children, I think, are some of the wisest people on planet Earth, and they need spaces where we're listening to them and they're being heard.
agreed, agreed. Kids are so funny too. So
Yes.
man, they make me laugh. So as adults, our ability to like maintain meaningful and close relationships with friends or partners often has roots in what we did experience as kids.
Yeah.
In the world of therapy, you may come across terms such as secure or insecure attachment. Attachment theory describes it's that emotional connection or the bonds that we form in our infancy and in our childhood years, and then how these bonds shape us as we move into our adult years. Trust and stability are characteristics of those with secure attachment styles. And insecure attachment, which can be categorized as anxious, avoidant, or disorganized insecure attachment styles, tend to be characterized by like a fear of abandonment,
Mm.
um, emotional distance, and varying reactions to conflict and intimacy.
Mm.
So, what you don't want to necessarily box yourself into one category. Having an understanding of how your emotional bonds were formed as a child can give you some very helpful information as you
Mm.
navigate intimacy in your adult years.
Mm.
And I just want to gently encourage anyone who acknowledges they often find themselves struggling to form those emotional bonds in intimate connections with friends or partners. It might show up in like a fear of commitment. Could even be a fear of going on a first date,
Mm.
with
Mhm.
someone. It shows up in different ways, and again, it's not just romantic attachments, relationships. One thing I just want to gently encourage you is that, you know, I would encourage you to start talking with someone if that's something you're able to do. And not from a place of like condemnation or judgment, but from a desire to get to know yourself more. Because the reality, Carrie, I think we all could keep doing this work the rest of our lives
Yes.
and continue to learn new ways of growing and stretching. Okay.
Yeah.
So curiosity is a much better approach towards yourself than what's wrong with me?
Mm.
Why am I the way I am?
Mm.
Unless it's being coming like, why am I the way I am, coming from that place of curiosity and interest. So while it can sometimes feel like scary to explore the ways we struggle to connect with God, ourselves, and others, this work is so very worth it if your
Mm.
heart is to thrive in relationships with others. So as the late psychologist and priest Henry Nouwen said, fear is the great enemy of intimacy. Fear makes us run away from each other or cling to each other, but does not create true intimacy.
Oh, so good. Thank you, Henry Nouwen and
Mhm.
Liz. That question, what's wrong with me? Oh, that is so detrimental to our state of well-being in mind, body, and soul. And I say that from experience. The freedom from that question has been one of the most life-giving things that has ever happened to me. Now, I still will say this to myself from time to time, what's wrong with me? And I now see it as a cue that it's time to take a pause and assess what's going on and really kind of get at the heart of why I'm asking that question. But this has not come easily. It
Mhm.
takes time, self compassion, and for me personally, knowing myself as beloved, not because of anything I've done or will do, but beloved as it is right now, as I am right now. And Liz, as we've talked about intimacy with ourselves and others, um, and touched on a little bit of our intimacy with God, but how has knowing yourself as beloved been part of your journey? Um, and maybe can you expand on this idea of intimacy with God?
Yeah. Before I do that, you just saying like that shift you made
Mm,
from going from this place of like that pathological, judgmental, what's wrong with me, shifting to using it as a cue.
yeah.
That's like in the counseling world, they'll talk about reframing. Like that's such a beautiful shift to make. And I can appreciate why that wouldn't have happened overnight if that's been so much part of your DNA for so long.
Yeah.
But what a shift, hey, because you're very right, Carrie. Like, it's not that we might never ask those questions of ourselves, like, oh, what's wrong with me? But then like, whoa, take a pause. Hey, what's going on?
Yeah,
What am I invited to pay attention to right now? Okay, something might be a bit off. Yeah, so much more
totally.
gentle.
Yes.
Um, but to your question, um, like I just want to say it takes time. We're very patient people, hey? It takes time to develop intimacy with different people. As each of us comes to the table with their own set of limitations, strengths, histories, and as I didn't get into great detail with attachment theory, but we have our own internal measurements of safety.
Mm,
So I'm not going to repeat my story, my experience of loneliness as a catalyst for intimacy in this episode, Carrie, because I do that in a few earlier episodes that we did together, way back almost a year ago. Hey, on
yes.
loneliness. Listeners, feel free to go listen to that if you want. But what I do want to say is that my experience with loneliness has often been the voice I've needed in my life to show me I'm trying to find intimacy outside the presence of God, outside my relationship with God.
Mhm.
It may present as restlessness, as I've said, and multiple times because it's a big one for me, or reaching out to people who aren't able to reach back at that moment, and not necessarily because these aren't people who don't love me. It's just people can't always just stop and be there, right?
Right.
Um, and so it can begin to lead me to find like my validation and what others say or think about me.
Mm,
Um, when really the invitation, this is this intimacy piece. This is how I frame it for myself or word it for myself is intimacy for me in my relationship with God is finding my true home in God. I do
beautiful.
borrow that from Henry Nouwen, but it's actually something that I really did experience a few years ago because of a lifetime of trying to earn and strive and all that kind of stuff, and not having my identity formed by that. Nothing wrong with doing, but when your sense of self is driven purely by your productivity, your performances, you can get pretty disconnected from what's really going on inside. Hey,
Yeah.
um, and God is the one, my home in God. God is the one who calls me by name, who draws me with his loving kindness. The one who created me knows me so intimately. He knows everything about me. He knows every thought and emotion and every hair on my head. Hey, like he knows
Yeah.
everything. And think about all the ways we hide some of like even our physical, what we might deem as flaws from the world. Hey, God sees it all and he doesn't see it as flaws. Hey, he welcomes it
Yeah.
safely and lovingly. So in my loneliness, Jesus has always been patiently and lovingly there, not forcing himself upon me, but waiting while lovingly drawing me to himself through his love. And Carrie, even though God draws me through his love, oh, that just sounds wonderful, Liz.
Yes.
uh, it can feel very uncomfortable when you haven't maybe either grown up in that. I have a feeling some of our listeners will connect with that.
Mm,
Um, if you haven't, if you haven't really experienced what safe love feels like from even a human standpoint, we can end up inadvertently putting that on God, okay,
mm,
and distancing ourselves from God. So when God lovingly just draws me, it's like, oh my gosh, why does this feel so uncomfortable? So for him to want to know, for him who knows everything about me and still wants to be close to me when in my human relationships, I have had some experiences of feeling rejected or feeling shamed or condemned.
mm.
That can be kind of jarring sometimes.
Yes.
So for me, if that kind of helps, I know I'm not going into great details about my story with how that has come about. That's why I encourage listeners to listen to the other episode on loneliness. But I just know for myself when I've allowed the pain of my human experience to allow me to color how God sees me, that ends up putting up a wall between him and I. And there's something about being drawn through the lens of love, through the lens of Jesus, that can just shapes like that just shifts everything.
Oh, the lens of love. Liz, I love that.
Mm.
And what you're talking about here really hits home. This has become almost a daily prayer for me. God, help me to see me through your eyes. I've lived a lot of my life with shame, coloring my understanding of how God, others, and myself see me and love me. And as I took a deep dive this week into understanding a bit more of why it has taken me over 40 years to come to this place of knowing myself as beloved, I mean, maybe I knew it, right, in my head,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
to know it in my heart and soul, to feel it in my bones, I realized that so much of my understanding around intimacy comes from the physical space of touch and being close with another human being. And this understanding of intimacy has been confronted and challenged over the past few years. As I've shared with our listeners before, in 2020, after being diagnosed with cancer, I was thrust into a journey with my body. Having a mastectomy and then a full hysterectomy a year later, at 45, I'm in the thick of menopause, which is a whole other episode. We'll do that one day.
Mhm.
And I'm missing parts of me that made me who I am as Carrie, as a wife, as a mother. This mixed with the world's ideas of what a person should or shouldn't look like has been a hard journey of learning to live with and love this new body. And of course, created as whole beings, mind, body, and soul, when one part of our being is under attack, in my case with cancer,
Yeah.
the other parts also suffer. Mind and soul also lack the intimacy that they need to flourish. Now, I don't think you have to have cancer or parts of your body removed to struggle with self compassion. Struggling to like ourselves, never mind love ourselves, I think that's part of the human experience. And I think it's challenging for many of us. One of my coping mechanisms has been to armor up and push away intimacy, the very thing, the healing balm that we all so desperately need. Now, there's so much wrapped up into this armor. It comes from not feeling worthy, not
Mm.
feeling pretty, not feeling lovable, only wanting to cuddle, right? I do want to say, though, with my recent journey with my body after cancer, and how that has made intimacy difficult for me, my husband still has very little trouble with intimacy and just cuddling, even still, which, I laugh about, but to be honest, it actually makes me quite emotional. Sometimes it's receiving the love, it's receiving the intimacy that is being extended in real loving ways. Sometimes it's receiving it that can be the hardest.
Very, oh goodness. I feel like I just heard a sermon in there, by the way, a few sermons, but thank you so much for
Probably.
sharing. Shared. Yeah, no, there's a few things I really do want to highlight that
Mm,
stood out to me this time around that I didn't even capture the first time I read this through. You said something so powerful about when one part like suffers, you're talking about the physical,
yeah.
it affects the other parts, the mind and the
Yeah.
mind and the emotions, the soul, right? That's what you're saying. And I just think what an image for people. Okay,
Hmm.
like, and again, I'm not implying if you're going through a hard time in your life, go broadcast it to everyone on your social media as a way to help people feel connected. But there is something so powerful. I've had a few people say this to me when we choose to have those healthy risks in relationships with others and like welcome people to help us. You talk about the challenge of receiving love.
Yeah.
I said, and for me, I can connect with that, and that idea of just even asking for help sometimes because I
Mm,
think even I got it, no big deal. I don't want to inconvenience someone. This is just a little thing.
right.
Most people who are in my world, Karen, I think you can connect with this too. They find it like an honor and a privilege when they're asked, right?
Yes.
They
That
want to
is
love you that way. They want to serve you that way if they're able to. And if they can't do it that way, there'll be other ways they can. And that idea of letting our walls down to say, I can't do this life by myself.
yeah.
It's such a privilege because some people, when they're feeling so helpless, and I can appreciate Carrie as a friend who knew you were going through your cancer journey. Yeah,
Mm,
I could pray for you. I could support you. I could cheer you on. I could make food, whatever. Like there's different ways we practically can help. There's a
yeah.
sense of helplessness because it's like I can't take it away from you. I can't remove it fully from you, and I want to. Right. So
Yes.
this idea of again, I'm not saying be the scapegoat or the sacrificial lamb so other people feel good about helping, but when we let our walls down um, there are people that want to step in and love you that way. Yeah.
That's
Thank you.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's huge, Liz. And there's something that happens to us too on the other end when we allow ourselves to receive, whether that's help, love, intimacy.
Mhm.
It's healing. I don't know what
Mhm.
other word to use, but
Yeah.
it is healing. And so the
Yeah.
more we do that, the more healing we can experience.
Yeah.
But the armor is real. And I think we all have it to some extent. And I don't just mean the armor we put on the outside, so we look like we're all put together, everything's good. The armor that we're putting on, it also hardens us on the inside.
Mm.
And that need to protect ourselves can seep into every fabric of our lives, making it necessary for the armor to be thicker and thicker as we live in this tension of our true selves and false selves. The true self is the person we've been created to be, the work of art that this world needs, that voice that we need to hear. The false self is the person we think we should be, or the person we think others think we should be.
Mm-hmm.
And as I have sought a healthier relationship and a truer understanding of intimacy that goes deeper and beyond just a physical touch, I've come to realize that there is a very clear reason why intimacy has been so hard for me, because intimacy is deeply intertwined with vulnerability. In fact, I don't think you can have one without the other.
I agree.
And I remember seeing an interview with Oprah and Brene Brown, and Oprah asked Brene, doesn't vulnerability open the door to greater intimacy? And Brene responded, I think it's the only door.
Mm.
And in her book, Atlas of the Heart, Brene writes, in a world where perfectionism, pleasing, and proving are used as armor to protect our egos and our feelings, it takes a lot of courage to show up and be all in when we can't control the outcome. It also takes discipline and self-awareness to understand what to share and with whom. Vulnerability is not oversharing. I really appreciate her naming this. Vulnerability, it's sharing with people who have earned the right to hear our stories and our experiences. Vulnerability is not weakness, it's our greatest measure of courage. And Liz, I feel and know these words in my bones. And that's probably why I keep coming back to them. In my own story, being vulnerable has been hard, and I've lived with a lot of armor, as I've said. The armor has been perfectionism, pleasing, proving. I mean, aren't those the marks of a successful person? Yet,
Yeah, some would agree with you, Carrie. Some would agree with you.
right? I think that is very much the world I've lived in. Those are the marks of being successful. And so that's the armor I've put on. But if research and experience show that vulnerability is the key to unlocking greater intimacy, then it's easy to see why intimacy is so hard, and maybe even confusing, because it involves some really big stuff: vulnerability, love, trust, body, mind, soul. These are not feelings and experiences that we just turn on and off. They are embodied in our very being and therefore expressed through our very being. We're made for all these things, but those safe spaces to experience them are not always easy to find. And one of the biggest shifts has, for me, I mentioned a little bit earlier, this idea of knowing myself as beloved. But I think it has also been who I believe God to be and my relationship with love, because I believe God is love. That has never changed. But like the rest of my life, my faith life has also been marked with perfectionism, pleasing, and proving in order to feel belonging, acceptance, and deserving of God's love. And I think the word I would use to describe it would be transactional. So, up until very recently, my relationship with God was very transactional. What do I do for God? How do I
Yeah.
serve? How do I please Him? What does God do for me? How is He faithful? Give and take. Um, but with the sense that I needed to earn love rather than be embraced and held by love itself because of love, nothing else, nothing that I've done, simply because of love. As a recovering perfectionist, which is what I call myself, there's an image that I hold on to when I need to be reminded of this love. Another story I may have shared with our listeners, I was born premature, 5 weeks early, just 4.5 pounds. And the doctors told my parents that I probably wasn't going to make it. I spent those beginning days in an incubator. And when I was a little bit older, my grandma shared with me a story about a time, one of the days that my dad was sitting next to me in the hospital. There were little holes in the
Mm.
sides of the incubator, and he stuck his finger in one of the holes. And I reached out, grabbed his finger, and squeezed it.
So sweet.
And he left that experience and told my mom and his mom, my grandma, she's going to make it. She's going to be okay. Well, obviously, he was right, as I'm here talking to you about this story. But it's that image that has stayed with me. And although I think of me and my dad, I actually also think of me and God. And I think for all of us, this is the image of God and us.
Yeah.
Just as vulnerable as the day we were born, no matter how much armor we've put on, squeezing the hand of love as we are, as it is, trusting we are held in an intimate, calm moment of connection, and that nothing can separate us from that love.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, no.
You said you were premature, hey, and I think even how we can sometimes maybe feel that about ourselves or even somebody else.
Mm.
Like, oh, why aren't they as vulnerable as I am? Like almost like they're behind or they're not quite where they're not ready, they're not baked yet, fully baked.
Right.
Maybe kind of a craft way to describe a baby who makes it to full term, but it's this thought of like we can sometimes be impatient with one another and our own process too. And while I think in relationship, we part of love is gently calling people up into deeper depths.
Yeah.
It's also still important that, you know, when the time is right, they're going to be ready to come out. They're going to be ready to open up, just like you were ready 5 weeks, right? In a sense. Again, I want to be careful that comparison, because I know that could be that can not land very well. But it's just my way of saying like
Mm.
that importance of being patient and gracious one another while, you
Yeah.
know, slowly inviting people, hey, yeah, when the time's right, you can let me know. Yeah.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love that. I think that's a really nice way of explaining it. And I think this love piece is really important. In our last episode, we talked about how Jesus, being fully human, embodied the very emotions we all feel. We looked at the story of the Garden of Gethsemane, and in this story, with all the other emotions we also see the vulnerability of Jesus. And I think we see that from birth to death. He embodied vulnerability, and he did so for the sake of intimacy, connection, love, not using his divinity to save himself, connecting to my humanity, not as something that needed to be fixed in order to be loved, but as something created in the image of love. This has also been a game changer and a shift that has brought deeper intimacy into my life with God, with others, and with myself. I think we have to be, when we talk about intimacy, I do think it's something we have to be intentional about, creating space for connection. For me, that's with my body, mind, and soul, feeling the feelings,
Mm,
noticing the inhales and exhales, the breath and source of life, being mindful of my surroundings, looking for beauty and light, not to negate what is ugly and dark, but to remember that that's not the whole story. It's not my whole story. It's not humanity's whole story. The whole story has been and always will be love.
Mm.
Yeah. I really believe that and pray that from this episode and other things we talk about that would really come through.
Mm-hmm. It came very clearly through your story, Carrie, just now.
Thank you.
Takes a lot of courage to talk about, even if you don't share every square inch of the story, because why would you? But the just even go where you went just now, it's just, I don't know. I just think for some people, it's going to have this connection for them to know, like, what are the parts of me that I do hide away, even from myself.
Yeah.
What causes me to withdraw from, whether it is like grief or, sadness, anger, joy, hope, you
Yeah.
know. I think vulnerability, if I can just say something briefly, because I don't want to take away from what you just said, and then we'll conclude. But um, this is obviously just through my lens. I sometimes find vulnerability can get equated with vulnerability is what we experience with another, with God. When we're talking about just really hard things like trauma and
Right.
cancer and those things. And there are that too. But it's also where the places you go, you get to dream with people, that you get to say, hey, I've had this deep desire in my heart to write a book for the first time, or to start growing my own food. Like, I've never been really brave to do that, right? Because maybe we have voices of doubts in our head, or I really want to go back to school, right? Whatever it is. Like,
Yeah.
I think that's also vulnerability, is
Yes.
being able to share what's in our hearts with other people.
Yes.
That can sometimes feel, for some people, just as scary as talking about a traumatic event. It's interesting, hey?
Yeah, definitely.
Um, yeah, and so thank you for sharing that, setting the table for people. I think it's going to connect with many people. So thanks for that, Carrie. Um,
Yes.
I want to close with the words of one of my favorite pastors and authors, John Mark Comer. Recently, I was watching one of his sermons on YouTube titled "Prayer: Talking with God." So Comer says, we can edit our thoughts. Hey, we
Mm.
edit our thoughts. Well, most of us do. Some of you don't. He jokes. Some of you don't edit your thoughts, but generally we edit our thoughts in order to present a more polished image. We don't want people to actually see who we are. I certainly don't want you to see who I am, and I'm guessing that's mutual. To present a more polished image of ourselves to the world in order to be loved and not rejected,
Mm.
to succeed and not to fail. And what happens when you do that hour after hour, day after day? When some of your jobs is literal image management, like you are your brand. That's actually kind of a bit true for you, hey, Carrie, in a sense, but that could mess up your soul. When we do this all day long, we can't help but carry that management performance, that edit button over into our life with God. So this is what he says here about prayer. Prayer is not a place to be good. It's a place to be honest. Many of us have built a wall between ourselves and any feelings of weakness or pain. And in doing so, we have unintentionally built a wall between ourselves and intimacy with God and with other people. So,
Mm.
learning to pray is learning to bring all that we are to God under the loving gaze of his loving eye, because he already knows all that is inside us.
Oh, that's beautiful. Beautiful.
So, as we close today, if I can speak on behalf of Carrie and I, we want to invite you and ourselves too to notice where in your story, and I know it's a broad way of saying that, hey,
Mm.
it could be a part of your life, or maybe one role that you have.
Right.
Maybe you're more transparent in your role as a wife or mother or teacher or friend than you are as, say, a pastor, right? I just say there might be parts
Yeah.
of you that you might edit more. So we want to invite any of you to notice where you might edit yourself with God, yourself, or others. So, as one example, if a trusted friend were to ask you sincerely, hey, how are you right now?
Mm.
What would you say? what would come to your mind? How honest would you want to be with that person? Hey,
Yeah.
if you were to pray and tell God what you are longing for right now, what's really in your heart, would you feel comfortable and safe enough to be vulnerable and tell him the truth? What's there? What's really there? Is there fear? Is there intrigue? Is there maybe a blend of both? You know,
Yeah.
I don't want to lead any of you too much with this. Um, this is just kind of give you just kind of an invitation to know when it comes to like sitting with yourself, sitting with God, with others, what's maybe a part of your story you find you filter and edit around, and why might that be? Again, not from a place of judgment towards yourself, but from a place of curiosity. Because maybe the invitation is, hey, maybe this is a time in my life for me to start going there, whether it's through journaling, talking with a friend,
Yeah.
a counselor, a spiritual director, whatever it is. This might be an invitation for you to do a deeper dive and get to know yourself a bit more. Hey, so
Yeah.
yeah, I just want to say again, thank you, Carrie, for what you shared today. I'm just so grateful that we have this opportunity to do this together. And again, there's only one Carrie voice, one Liz voice. And ultimately, I know my heart is for people to know the voice of love, that is God. But yeah, I just thank you for setting the table with me today. It's really grateful for you and our friendship.
Oh, the feelings are mutual. Thank you so much, Liz. And thank you, friends. Go
Looking
out
forward to the next time.
now.
Yeah, we'll look forward to
Yeah.
the next time I get to do this with all of you, even from a distance,
Yes,
virtually.
exactly. Many blessings, friends.
Take care.